Hi guys, welcome to my channel and lesson 6 of the Watercolour Trip to Italy painting book. In this one I'm going to be painting a scene from Rovereto in northern Italy entitled Siesta, and in addition to watercolour I'll also be using masking fluid and artist wax. I'm also really excited as I'm going to be opening this surprise parcel I received in the post the other day, so make sure you watch till the end of the video when I'll show you exactly what's inside. So let's jump straight into lesson 6 of this watercolour book and take a quick look at the reference photo of this outdoor scene and the artist's interpretation before we start. As always, we have 2 outline sketches and 2 attempts at this painting, so I like to separate them with a piece of washi tape. This painting is in 3 steps, so I'm going to read through the whole of step 1 first so I know what I'm doing. So step 1 is to mask on the gaps of the trees and around the window and let it dry. Then we have to wash the entire sheet, and once that's dry we have to then use the paraffin wax. So I'm using the masking fluid that came in the kit, which comes in this little bottle with a fairly small nozzle which makes application easier. It's also coloured, so it's a light green colour which makes it easy to see where you're going. With that applied, and whilst the masking fluid is drying, I thought I'd pre-wet the paint swatches on my palette, and this isn't something I've done before, but it will help activate the paints before I start to use them. So with the masking fluid dry and my paints all ready to go, I could then start the painting, but this step I had to wash the entire sheet with a watery mix of yellow ochre and cadmium yellow. As far as possible, I am going to be showing you my paint palette as well, so you can see the colours I'm mixing and how much paint I'm using. I also am using the same technique as I did last week, and that's to test out on a piece of scrap watercolour paper how the paints lay down on paper, and try and match it up with the photo reference and also the artist's impression. I am going to be using the 1/2 inch flat brush that I started using last week rather than the size 8 round that came in the kit, just because it makes applying background washes a lot quicker and the results are a lot smoother. So the next step, and whilst this background is still wet, we need to add a bit of raw umber to the ground. For the last 2 parts of this first step, we then had to apply the paraffin wax, and there was no instruction on the sheet that said you had to allow your paper to dry first, but I was guessing this was pretty important, as if you apply the paraffin wax to damp paper it would just scuff it up and ruin the surface. So I allowed my paper to dry before then going in with circular strokes on the grass area. We also had to rub the wall with paraffin in a chaotic fashion, and I did kind of look back to the reference photo and the artist's painting as well to see whereabouts those areas might be. For the second step, I did read through all the instructions again as I did with step 1, and first of all we had to wash the wall and the tree area partly using a 3 colour mix of yellow ochre, raw umber and burnt umber. I tested out my paint mix on a separate piece of watercolour paper again, as I have been having a few troubles mixing in the brown shades. They don't seem to be quite dark enough, so I did have to play around a little bit until I got the shade that I was happy with. I was a little bit unsure as to where to apply this paint mix, as the instruction was to wash the wall and tree area partly, but I looked back onto step 2 of the painting and decided that I needed to apply this to the whole of the tree area. The second part of this step 2 was to, whilst this layer was still wet, add leaves of the trees with Watercolour, so using a 4 colour mix of different colours to try and get that nice variation. The 4 colours that we had to drop into this wet area were burnt umber, raw umber, viridian and olive green. So I started off by adding rather a bold amount of viridian and a little bit more water as it was already starting to dry. That's one of the issues that I've got with this paper, is that although it's cold pressed, it does tend to dry really quickly. So then I dropped in a variety of the different colours, the burnt umber, the raw umber, and added some olive green as well. I do really enjoy this watercolour technique, watching the paint mix and bleed on the paper, although I do think in this first example it was a bit heavy with the viridian, so in my next painting I'm going to try and tone that down a little bit. So the next step is to wash the grass with a 3-colour mix of orange green, yellow ochre and burnt umber. And remember, we put the paraffin wax down on the grass, so it'll be interesting to see the effect and the texture we get when we apply the paint. It was quite hard to gauge in the palette what sort of colour I was mixing up, so again I used my separate piece of watercolour paper to test out the mix I'd made before I applied it to the paper. I tried to compare the colour I'd mixed with that of the artist painting and also the reference photo as well, but we have to remember also that there's already some colour down, so that will also have an effect with these transparent watercolours as to what the final result will be. I had to be quite quick with this part because the next step was to use the wet in wet technique to add some shadow under that tree. The shadow was made with a mixture of raw umber and Madder Lake Deep. The Madder Lake Deep is a really strong red colour, and one which, if it was up to me, I probably wouldn't have included it in the mix for the shadow, but it's really interesting to try out these different colours and see how they come together on the paper. I dropped this into the grass area while it was still wet so that it could all bleed together and look natural. For the last part of step 2, we had to wash the shutters, and that was with a 2-colour mix of burnt umber and cadmium red. And looking on the reference photo, this area was actually quite dark compared to the artist's interpretation of that in their painting. I thought though that the more red, brighter tones of the shutters in the artist painting would help to tie the painting in as a whole, as we'd use that Madder Lake Deep in the shadow under the tree. I had to mix in a lot more of the burnt umber than I did the cadmium red, as I'm still struggling with that colour a little bit. It is quite a weak colour, but eventually I did get the shade that I was after for the shutters of the window. So now we're on to step 3, and the first part of this is to add stains onto the wall and to then wash the bench. So first of all we had to mix up burnt umber and Madder Lake Deep. Now after mixing these two colours together and swatching it out on my paper, I wasn't entirely sure where I was meant to be applying it. The instructions said that we were to use this paint mix to add stains on the walls, but when I looked at the artist painting and also the reference photo, the stains on the walls looked a lot more yellow. And this didn't really seem to fit with the burnt umber and Madder Lake Deep colour, so I just applied a bit under the tree and moved on to the next step. The next step was to wash the bench with a mixture of raw umber and burnt umber, and we had to concentrate more dark on the left hand side. After laying down a base layer of the burnt umber and raw umber mix, and whilst this was still wet, I was able to go in with a little bit more of that paint colour just to darken up the left hand side, and then that bled together really nicely to create more of a shadowed area on that left hand side. The next step was to wash the chairs with a 4-colour mix of cadmium red, Madder Lake Deep, burnt umber and raw umber. Using these red colours again helps to further make the painting cohesive and tie in all those colours that we used both in the tree and in the shadow underneath the tree. Having said that, it did take me a little while to get the colour I was happy with, and I probably mixed up far too much paint considering it was only a tiny bit for those chairs. With this done, step 4 was to wash the shadows on the shutters using burnt umber and Mijello Deep. Again, using this Mijello Deep in with the burnt umber, we ended up with quite a red colour, so I ended up only applying it in the top right hand corner of the shutter. This I could see the artist had done on their painting, but I wasn't entirely sure. Moving on to the next step, and it said to wash the branches with a 3-colour mix of burnt umber, viridian and Mijello Deep. The instruction also said to darken in knots, so I set about making as dark of a colour as I could to make those areas really stand out. So with my branch colour all mixed up, I then decided to change to the size 1 brush that came with the kit. When it came to the painting though, I realised that the instructions hadn't specified or made any reference to the trunk of the tree, but being that it was all part and parcel of the same thing and there was no separate mention of the trunk, I decided that I'd fill this in with this colour as well. Now, it wasn't until this point in the painting that I came up to a bit of a stumbling block, because I thought, hang on a minute, I'm sure we should have removed the masking fluid. When did it say to move the masking fluid? Well, it didn't, and I looked back on all the instructions step by step and realised that it had been left out or not put in. So at that point I decided to remove the masking fluid so that I could get on with the rest of the painting. So I mixed up some more of the branch colour using burnt umber, viridian and Mijello Deep, and tried to get a really nice dark rich colour that would stand out and add contrast to the rest of the painting. The instruction also said to darken in knots, so I concentrated some more of that dark colour into areas either in shadow or where the branches attached onto the trunk of the tree. The next step was to wash the leaves using the watercolor technique again, using viridian and burnt umber. I tried to concentrate the more brown leaves on the left hand side of the tree where my brown wash was, and the greener colours on the right hand side of the tree where the more greener colours were. I also filled in the gap where I'd removed the masking fluid with some of the yellow ochre and cadmium yellow mix that I still had left on my palette. Next up, we had to wash the stone frame of the window with a very watery mix of burnt umber and yellow ochre. The last and final step was to add shadow around the window using ultramarine and yellow ochre and quite a lot of water. With this done, the painting should have been complete, but I did then go back in and use some of the dark brown colour that I'd mixed up for the branches to finish off the details on the shutters. I also added in some details to the bench and added some stains to the walls in a colour that I thought looked a little bit more appropriate than the one that was mixed up with Mijello Deep earlier on. So that's attempt number 1 complete. It didn't turn out too badly considering, but there are definitely a few changes that I'm going to make for attempt number 2. Before starting the second attempt though, I had a few things to sort out. The first thing was I'd run out of the burnt umber that came with the kit. The other colours seemed okay, but I think I've had to use more burnt umber in colour mixes as it seemed quite weak. Now there was an extra supply of paint swatches that came with the kit, but I didn't really want to break into these just yet as I'd fall into the same situation later on. Instead, I decided to add some of my own Mission Gold burnt umber from a tube to the palette, which would mean I could still carry on using the palette, and it would also give me the opportunity to test out another brand of burnt umber and perhaps ease some of my frustrations. The second thing I wanted to do was to add a note to myself of when to remove the masking fluid. There wasn't any instruction as to when to do this, but I figured the best time to do this would be after step 2. At this point we will already have done the wet and wet technique for the tree, and we'd be all prepared for step 3 when we have to add shadows on the shutters and that kind of thing. I also made a bit of an adjustment to part 1 of step 3 and thought that I'd try yellow ochre mixed with the burnt umber for the stains on the walls. So with all that done, it was time to start again with the masking fluid, and I really like this masking fluid. It laid down really easily, and I like the fact that it was coloured so you can see where you'd put it. I was really optimistic that this second painting would be a lot better than the first, but straight away I seemed to run into troubles with my paper drying too quickly, so ended up having to apply a second coat and think the background came out quite dark, a lot darker than the first one, and I wasn't sure that I was that pleased with it. However, when comparing it to the actual photograph reference, it didn't look too dissimilar, so I carried on and hoped that I could make the best of it. On to step 2, and where the instructions said to wash the wall and the tree area, I used this colour to do the stains on the wall. And I think this worked out a lot better than the previous attempt. When it came to painting the tree, I was conscious this time that I didn't want to make it as bright green as I had in the first attempt, so I added less of the viridian and more of the olive green colour to try and match up more with the artist painting and also the reference picture. This step required the use of the wet in wet technique and also the watercolor technique, so we had to drop colours in and let them mix on the paper. One problem I did have this time was that my paper seemed to be drying a lot more quickly, so I did get more streaky effects and the blend wasn't as smooth as last time. I also found when doing the grass area under the tree that I must have applied a lot less paraffin wax this time because the effect wasn't as textured as it was in the first step. I did remember to move my masking fluid though, and I did put in some darker shadows onto the shutters, which I think I like better than the first attempt. Before I went any further, I did fill in the masked off area in the tree with some of the mixture that was left over on my palette when we did the original background. This gave it time to dry before I went in and added the branches, and when I did add the branches they would be nice and crisp and fine and not bleed into potentially wet background. When mixing the colours together for the trunk and the branches of the trees, it did seem to be a bit easier to get a nice dark colour with my own burnt umber. But I'd love to know if anyone has got any recommendations of any brands where they know the earth colours are really strong and really pigmented, because I think I'm yet to find the perfect one for me. On the whole though, the process for this second attempt was a lot easier than the first, but I think I still prefer attempt number 1 as a finished piece. But I'd love to know what you think in the comments. Which do you prefer and why? So let me know. So now let's find out what is inside this parcel. This I received in the post the other day, completely free, from the same people that make the Watercolour Trip to Italy painting book. The first thing in this package is the Watercolour Trip to France book, and this is a larger book than the Italy book that I've already got, and I received this as a gift to try and review. This video isn't sponsored, but I am going to be trying it out and giving an honest review on what I find out and how I find the book as a whole. There are a total of 16 different lessons in this book, and they are laid out in a very similar way to the Italy painting book that I've been working through so far. At first glance they do look a little bit more involved and the steps look a little bit more lengthy, and perhaps they might be more suitable for someone who's at more of an intermediate level. So I'm hoping I can take on the challenge and do them justice and do a good job. But I'm super excited to try it out and see how we get on. The second thing that came in the parcel was this travel sketchbook of Venice. And when you open it up you get this water brush as well as the sketchbook itself. I will put a link in the description box to the store on Etsy where these can be found at if anyone's interested in either buying the Italy book that I've been working on or either of these two products as a result of seeing them now today. Now this second sketchbook is a travel sketchbook, so with the water brush and this sketchbook you should have everything you need to go out and about and start painting. And this is something that really wowed me, because on the left hand side next to or opposite the sketch you have this really rather pretty sheet of what turned out to be paint. I was pretty blown away by this because I've never seen it before, and I am really excited to give it a try. So you've got your outline sketch, you've got your paint, and at the back of the sketchbook, if you turn over in this little envelope, you have actually got a photograph for each and every one of the 10 sketches. So you might not have the instructions, but you have got some really lovely reference photos to use to help you get those colours right. As well as these 10 paintings to try, there is also space in the sketchbook to try out your own sketches, and I'm sure there's plenty of paint on these paint pages that you can use those for your own plein air paintings. I absolutely love the look of this sketchbook, and I'm really inspired and excited to try it out. But I would love to know which of these 2 sketchbooks you would like to see me try out first on this channel. Do let me know in the box below, and also let me know as well which one you liked of the 2 different attempts today. If you need to catch up on any of the previous lessons in this Paint Italy series, then I will link them up in the cards above for you to go and check out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye!